that a diligent man sets up a financial kingdom because they rule. All right, so today, the key word that we want to talk about today is the word diligence, or to be diligent. And exactly as that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And so we want to apply diligence. We want to talk about diligence, or to be diligent in spiritual matters or in faith matters, and then extend it to other places in our life, which in this case, we're actually going to be talking about our finances. So yes, and so those of us who are spiritually bankrupt, the reason is that we are not being diligent enough about our faith and the matters concerning our spiritual well-being. You do not commit to prayer. You do not commit to the study of the word. All you do is just let things fall the way they may. You do not even attend church. You are not being diligent. You spend your Sunday afternoons watching games, and that's it. There is nothing about your spiritual life that you have invested in. You are not showing any care. You do not care about it. And that is what the word diligence means. So if you are not doing anything to promote your spiritual well-being, then you are going to be spiritually poor. And that is what it means in verse 4 of Proverbs 10. It says that the lazy hand brings poverty. So lazy hand spiritually brings poverty. And then the diligent hand brings wealth. So if you, on the other hand, are involved in things that matter spiritually to you, if you are concerned with your faith life, you invest in your faith life, you care, you show consciousness, you show diligence in the matters of faith, you are always looking ahead to ensure that your life is not just lived on this planet Earth, but you are looking out to a future life after the, in the afterlife. Then you will be diligent. And if you're being diligent that way, you are spiritually wealthy. You are not poor. But those who are not looking out that way, people who live like all their life gives is on this earth, they become spiritually poor because lack of diligence leads to poverty, or laziness in terms of spiritual matters lead to poverty. So with that being said, we are going to apply this to our financial and economic life. Stay there, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Whole Life channel. Now, we're going to be talking about how being diligent can affect your finances. The lazy hand brings one to poverty, and then the diligent hand brings one to wealth. And so, if you are also living your life and you do not like to work, you do not care about being, diligent, you are not caring about the things concerning money, then I can assure you that you are going to be poor if you are not already poor. People who negate or who neglect to invest in their financial life, to invest in their hands, in the things that we call work, are definitely going to be poor. That is straightforward. And as a matter of fact, that scripture in Proverbs 10:4 wasn't even referring to spiritual things. We happen to, apply it spiritually because we want to make sure we are balanced. But it's as plain as that. It's saying that lazy hands make for poverty. And so if you are not diligent, if you are watching me and you are taking your work not serious, you work when you want, you call out anytime you want. There is a small thing and you are calling out every now and then, you don't want to go to work. It's not because you don't like the job in particular, but whether or not you like it or not, if you are signed up to work, you are supposed to show up. And so the first thing to come out of poverty, the first way to come out of poverty is to be diligent in matters of work, in matters of your hands, in the things that you are supposed to do, which we call work. If you are not diligent, if you are not punctual, you do what you like. You do not, stick to schedules. You do not stick to the plans that, has been set up for you to do to make money. Then I can say for a fact that you are going to be poor if you're not already poor. You are not going to amass any wealth, because according to scripture, which is, there's no argument about it, the lazy hands are going to turn into poverty. But the diligent, or the hardworking, the one that shows up for work, the one who shows conscientiousness, the one who shows care about in matters of their economics, in matters of their finances, those who care about their financial life are eventually going to make more in their financial life. But if you do not care, then I can almost guarantee that you're going to be poor, because it's not me who's saying it is a principle, spiritual principle that has been laid down. That doesn't mean that everybody that is poor because they are lazy. No, poverty has its own, several ways people become poor. But if you are not working, if you do just want to stay in bed, if you do just want to hang around on TV and just spend all day, playing games, video games if it is, or just rolling with friends in parties, and you do not commit to a stipulated amount of work, I can assure you that you will be poor if you're not already poor. I'm not saying that it is principle that happens. Nobody's going to pay you when you have not contributed anything into their lives. Now, that being said, we also have another scripture that also backs us up in Proverbs again, chapter number 13. Let me see if I can read that right quick. The same Proverbs, chapter number 13, and verse number 4, if I can get to that right quick. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 4. It's saying that the sluggard, or let me see if I can post that too. It's saying that the sluggard's appetite is never filled. The sluggard, you could replace that with lazy. The lazy man's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. The desires of the diligent, the desires of the hard worker, the desires of the person who sticks to work, who is encouraged by giving themselves to work. Those desires of that person are more likely going to be satisfied than the one who is lazy. It's straightforward as that. There's no two ways about it. And then from that, there's also going to be another one, which is in Proverbs 21:5, which says that, let me just post that, because we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we want to do. I'm going to show Proverbs chapter number 21 and verse 5. I think it's verse 5. It's saying that the plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. So the plans of those, or the thoughts of those who are involved in diligence are going to end up in profit. In other words, those who think, who work with their brains, who plan their lives, are going to become richer. They are going to be able to satisfy their desires, while those who do not, who hastily try to make money, are going to become poor. And so, as we talk about financial diligence now, we want to tell you that if you do not have any plans about your finances, then you can also become poor. And that's why it is important to have financial goals. It's important to set up goals financially and ensure that you follow through with those goals you set, because the plans of the diligent will lead to profit. It will lead to increase. It will lead to wealth. But those who do not plan, or who hastily just live, hastily just live means they are not planning anything. Everything goes. Those people will become poor. No matter how much they work, no matter how hard they actually work, they are not going to make as much as those who plan. And so diligence, in financial diligence, we mean you have to plan. You have to have financial planning. So two things. You have to first work hard, and then you have to plan. Now, working hard with your hands does not necessarily mean that you have to work for somebody all the time. Working hard with your hands, some people have no skill. But technically, if you say work with your hands, we mean that work with your hands. You have a skill, and you are using your skill to exchange that skill for money. But not everybody has a handy skill. Some people may not be able to do anything, with their hands. In other words, not the hands there in scripture does not mean that you always have to use your hands to work. What it means is whatever God has given you, whatever potential that has been bestowed on you, it may be a talent of singing, it may be a talent of poetry, poetry. It may be a talent of healing. It may be a talent of acting. It may be a talent of writing songs. It may be a talent of every kind. You are not necessarily going to the factory to work with your hands, but whatever it is that you have been given, if you, by diligence, put them to work and you don't be lazy around them, then you are going to make money. You are going to be wealthy. But those who relax and think that they don't matter, people who just let things fall the way they may, they end up being poor. And that is what the scripture is saying. So that is a financial wisdom that we are grasping from here. First of all, you got to work. You got to have diligence with your work. Normal work and then diligence with everything that God has given you in terms of your capacities, in terms of your abilities, in terms of your talent, in terms of your skills, whatever it is God has given you, whatever it is you have learned from school, whatever it is that you have gleaned or learned from other people, you got to put it to work. For that elevates you from poverty and brings you to a level where you can call yourself rich or wealthy. And then the third one is that I've already alluded to, is that you do use your mind to create the wealth. And so you plan, financial planning. If you do not plan financially, you are going to plan to fail, especially as you grow. A lot of people do not plan. By the time they turn 60, 70, then they are looking back and say, what did I do with my life? They have no retirement, no life insurance, nothing to fall on. In fact, it becomes so hard for them to even live. Social Security is not enough to sustain them. And most people, end up living so bad because of lack of financial planning in their early lives. And so as we go forward, we're going to be talking about certain things that you can do to plan your finances for the future, especially including talking about life insurance and 401k and all those other good stuff. But we just want to whet your appetite and say that it is important to take care of all those things, especially if you want to do well, because you are not expected to just fold your arms and be lazy or let things fall the way they may and then be turned into ruin. The last thing that I want to talk about with diligence is that the scripture also says that the man who is diligent, they shall rule. The man who is diligent, he shall rule. So a diligent man or woman is one that creates kingdoms. And you can rule if you have a domain, right? Anybody who can rule is one who has a domain. Because before you can rule over certain things, you have to have a domain or an area over which you can rule. And if you have a domain that you rule on, then you have a kingdom. So in other words, a person who is diligent has a kingdom, and everybody who is diligent has a kingdom. We're not talking about kingdom in terms of people bowing to you and you being a king, but I'm talking about you taking over certain things that you have absolute control over. That is your domain. So because you have a domain that you rule over, you have a kingdom that you take over. And only the diligent has that. Proverbs 12:24 says that the diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. In other words, if you are diligent, remember we discussed diligence in the beginning as having or showing care. You caring about stuff, about work, whether it is the work of your hands, the work of your mind, the work of the skills that God has given you, the work or the skill that you have obtained from training, whatever it is, putting that to use or working that brings you, showing care of that is making you diligent, right? And the scripture is saying that if you are diligent in those things, then you rule. And so that buttresses the point that I made earlier, that the diligent person creates a kingdom, because if you rule, before you rule, you have to have a domain. And if you have a domain over which you rule, then you have a kingdom over which you rule. And so the scripture is saying that if you can rule in the affairs of your finances, you have to have diligence. So some people are living and growing old, making money, and yet they don't have enough to even create a kingdom. They have no financial kingdom. In fact, in their homes, there's no systems in place to take care of them, let alone take care of their children, to take care of their children and take care of their children's children. What scripture says that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. That's what scripture says, right? A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. That's what scripture says. And so if you are not to that extent, then you haven't created a big enough kingdom. Your kingdom has not included you, your immediate children, and your children's children. You have a limited kingdom in that regard. But diligence will take you away from that state into the state where you rule and you have a greater kingdom that encompasses not just your immediate family, but those that come after them and those that come after them, children's children. And so that is what we are gleaning and learning from today's word called diligence or diligent. That a diligent man sets up a financial kingdom because they rule. Because they are diligent, they have a domain and they rule over them. And so that's where we're going to end today's show. And I'm pretty sure that you have been blessed. If you have, make sure you hit the like button and ensure that you share the stream with somebody else, and also subscribe to the channel, because scripture says that, dear friend, my wish for you is that you prosper and be healthy, just as it is well with your soul. Prosper, be healthy, just as it is well with your soul. Until we see you again next time, God bless.